Hello friends, welcome to another video in a series in which we discuss the lesser known nuggets of Bible knowledge and explore the stories and artifacts that you don't hear in your average homily or fiery Sunday morning sermon. Now in the last video we talked about how Lot and his two daughters, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, ended up fleeing to the mountains and hiding in a cave. And his two daughters, who evidently thought they were the last human beings on earth, in 2 successive nights, got him roaring drunk with wine, slept with him, and got pregnant by him, and thereby gave birth to a couple of nations. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that video, I encourage you to do so. It'll give you a bit of context for what we're going to discuss today, which is, as promised, a story about a woman named Tamar and how she seduced her rapacious, rather unobservant father-in-law, Judah. In fact, she didn't even have to get him drunk. She made it his idea. He propositioned her. She accepted, got pregnant, and nearly lost her life in the aftermath. And I'm going to show you how she not only saved her own life, but took a rather disastrous situation and turned it into circumstances she could live with. Now I'm calling this video, Tamar's Victory, Judah's Rod of Shame. Now don't get too excited here because this has nothing to do with male anatomy. This is literally a shepherd's rod. And you'll see the significance of the title when we get to the end of the story. Okay. Now before we get into that story, let me give you an introduction, kind of show you where we are in history. Let's start with Judah. Judah's an important guy. You might recognize the name. He is one of the eponymous 12 tribes of Israel, or at least will become such. He is one of 12 brothers. He's the 4th oldest son of a man named Jacob, who has been given the name Israel, which means to struggle with or contend with God. And it's an apt name because this family is one dysfunctional clan. And we'll talk about that in our next video, and about what they do to Joseph, the coat of many colors Joseph. But for now, we're going to stick with Judah. Okay, for most of Judah's life, in fact for all of Judah's life, he has been working for his father Jacob as a shepherd, a sheep herder. But starting with Genesis chapter 38, Judah decides to leave Pops and break out on his own. And he makes a friend with a guy named Hira, who is, according to the scriptures, an Adulamite. Now, I love Hira just because he's called an Adulamite. I don't know what the hell this guy actually does for the story. He just kind of pals around with Judah in certain key moments. Well, while he's with Hira, the Adulamite, Judah meets his wife, who the scripture does not name. She is simply known as the daughter of Shelah, and she is a Canaanite. Well, the text is rather remote and tepid about the description of this marriage. The text reads something like this in describing their union. And lo, he did marry her, and lay with her, and she did conceive, and gave birth to a son named And behold, she did conceive again, and gave birth to Onan. And hark, thereby she did conceive yet a 3rd time, and gave birth to Shelah. And it was at Kezib that she gave birth to Shelah. Kezib. Yeah, pretty sure one of the 7 Horcruxes were found there. Pretty sure that makes Shelah a Slytherin, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm not sure why it's put in such stark terms. I would propose, it is my theory, I don't know this, that perhaps the writers of the text are giving silent commentary on his marrying a Canaanite. See, for the children of God to marry or have marital interactions with the Canaanites is a big no-no, and we see that over and over again throughout the text. It's probably why this poor woman is never named, although we know the name of her father. So she's had 3 sons. Is the oldest, and he comes of age, and Judah decides it's time for him to get a wife. So he goes out and he finds the woman Tamar. Unfortunately, the marriage is short-lived because is wicked in the sight of God, and God smites him, kills him. Now, we don't know why God killed him. I have no idea what did to make God so mad that he just, out of the blue, just... But we're about to see an example of what might make God mad enough just to strike somebody down from above with the second oldest son, Onan. Anyway, there's also, I'm going to point out to you, a little play on words here that the authors of the text engage in here. Because the name is a palindrome for the Hebrew word for wicked, which happens to be Ra. So the text reads something like, "Behold, was Ra in the sight of God, and he killed him." The Hebrews had a rather tight and concise vocabulary, and the word for evil, Ra, is used almost interchangeably for a lot of different words. Everything from sin to the wrath of God to general natural calamity. So Ra, or wickedness, or bad, is used pretty much everywhere. Well, and so the word is used here. Okay, so Tamar now is a freshly minted widow. Judah then says something rather strange to his second oldest son. He says, "Onan, boy, get your butt over here. Go on in there and lay with your brother's widow. Get her pregnant. Raise up children unto your brother." Now, what in the world is that about? This is a tradition called Levirate marriage, from the Latin word levar, which means brother-in-law. And it's basically an ancient Bedouin tradition, which is the brother of the deceased man goes and sleeps with his widow and bears children for the deceased man. So in other words, if my brother Paul, say, dies, I go sleep with his wife, and his children will run around calling themselves, "I'm Benjamin, son of Paul," and I won't have anything to do with it. I'm just a surrogate or a sperm donor. So another thing to point out here, as we dealt with in the Lot and his two daughters story, this was an insurance policy for the widow. So by tradition, women were cared for in their old age by their oldest son. And if a woman didn't have sons, she was in a bit of trouble. So it was Onan's responsibility to see to it that Tamar had means of protection and care in her old age. However, Onan is strangely unwilling. He goes in to sleep with her all right, but instead of performing the deed to its completion, he engages in an ancient method of birth control called the withdrawal method. And the text says he spills his semen on the ground. Well, I don't know how effective that method is overall, but it was effective enough because Tamar doesn't become pregnant. And this makes God mad, and God smites another one. So what's the big deal for Onan? I mean, why does he have such a problem with this? I mean, this is a win-win, right? He not only gets to do a good deed for his brother, but come on. Well, there's another aspect of this culture and inheritance traditions. See, the oldest brother stands to inherit a double portion of whatever his father has when his father dies. The youngest brother will then get a third, and whoever's born after, you basically become the servants of your older brothers. That stands to reason if you're in an area with only so much land and big families. You can't continue to divide the land and divide the sheep and divide the land and divide the sheep and so on and so forth. Otherwise, nobody has anything. So that's just kind of how it was. So Onan's thinking, if I get that woman knocked up and she has kids, I'm stuck with a third. So what Judah was basically asking him to do was to screw himself out of a double portion of an inheritance. So it was greed and avarice that made Onan make the decision that he made. Judah's down 2 sons. And Tamar is once again out of luck. She's not been impregnated. She has no children. And she is now tainted goods. She is not marriable material by anyone else. The only thing that she can hope is that Shelah, Judah's now only son, comes of age, which is what Judah promises her. She says, "Woman, you go on back and live with your daddy until Shelah comes of age. And when he's old enough, I'll give him to you." Aren't you glad you're not a woman in 15th century Palestine, in Bedouin culture? Well, here's the thing. Judah has no intention of giving Shelah to Tamar. He thinks she's kind of a black widow. If she has anything to do with it, he'll be dead too. So she goes off, she puts on her widow's garb, and goes and lives with her father for a time. Through the course of time, Judah's wife dies, and Judah puts on his mourning clothes, and then, quote, is comforted, goes on about his life. He meets up with Hira again, the Adullamite, to go shear some sheep. Maybe he sees old Hira coming down the way. Hira says, "Hell's bells! Judah Ben Jacob, is that you? Man, I heard about your spate of bad luck, son. Man, first your 2 sons and now your wife. You've had a hard lot, man. You know what cheer a feller up? Why don't you come on up to Timnah with me and we'll shear some sheep? Ain't nothing gets the blood boiling like some good old sheep shaving." Well, Judah agrees, and the 2 of them head on up to Timnah to shear some sheep. Meanwhile, Tamar hears of it. Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear sheep. And so she takes off her widow's garb, puts on a veil, and heads on up to Timnah to intercept Judah. And she lays in wait for him at a crossroads called Enaim, which, according to scholars, might actually mean the opening of the eyes. It's once again a little wordplay by our Hebrew writers, who are about to exploit the relative blindness of Judah. Because Judah, along with Hira, comes trundling up the road, and Judah sees this woman sitting by the side of the road, and she's wearing a veil. And he thinks she's a prostitute. And so he bumps Hira in the ribs and says, "Son, why don't you give me a minute?" And Judah is not one to mince words or mess around. He heads straight up to her and says, "Woman, let me sleep with you." Tamar, in disguise, says, "Well, honey, what are you going to give me for sleeping with you?" And he says, "How about I bring you a young goat from my herd?" Now I can just see her saying, "You know, that sounds great. You know, I can think of nothing better for my business than to drag along a bawling goat behind me from shrine to shrine to engage with my clients. I can just go ahead and incorporate that into my marketing strategy now, can't I? I can say maybe..." Anyway, I'm sure that's not what she said. She's not trying to turn a profit after all. She's just trying to pass as a prostitute. So she accepts. But in my Western mind, that's a rather strange currency for a prostitute, especially when you consider that Judah sold his own brother for 20 shekels of silver. Anyway, Judah says, "Well, I ain't got it on me." "Let me guess, honey. Would you like me to put it on your tab?" "I'd dearly appreciate it." "Well, honey, it's not that I don't trust you, but you understand, in my line of work, I'm going to need some collateral." And Judah says, "All right, well, what do you want, woman? I mean, he's randy. He hasn't been laid in a while, so he's desperate." Tamar says, "You hand me your signet and the cord and that staff of yours, and you got yourself a deal." Judah says, "All right," and basically hands her over what is the equivalent of his major credit card, driver's license, and his car keys. The signet is basically a stamp that he presses into clay to sign his name. And as far as his staff goes, in the words of Gandalf the Grey, "An old man and his walking stick are not easily parted, Bilbo Baggins." So I guess he probably carved it, and it's special to him anyway. He hands it over. Now, I don't know whether they pitch a tent in the middle of at the side of the road there, or whether there's a Hotel 8 just around the corner, or whether he just bumps Hira in the ribs and says, "Son, you mind turning around and give us some privacy?" But anyway, they do the deed, and she returns home, removes her veil, puts on her widow's garb again, and is soon pregnant. Or sometime later, Judah sends a young goat with Hira to find this prostitute to pay her. Hira comes back to Judah and says basically, "Hoss, you ain't gonna believe. I looked everywhere for that woman and I never did find her. I asked around and they said, there ain't no shrine prostitute around here. I don't know what you're talking about, son." Judah says, "Well, we'll let her keep what she's got, or else we'll become a laughingstock of all the neighborhood. At least I tried." Well, I'm not sure how he thinks he's going to become a laughingstock. If maybe he thinks that just by sleeping with a strange woman he thinks is a prostitute, or by not paying his debt. Well, paying his debt is about to become a rich irony, because 3 months after the fact, after the ignominious union, Judah finds out she's pregnant. Some busybody gossip at Tamar's house, sends word to Judah that essentially, your daughter-in-law has played the whore, now she's pregnant as a result. What are you going to do about it? Judah says, bring that woman out and let's have her burned to death. What? Now, what the hell is wrong with this guy? This man has just gone out of his way to pay a prostitute that he slept with, and now when his daughter comes up pregnant, allegedly due to the same thing, he's going to have her burned to death. Well, unfortunately, burning to death is a bit of a tradition among the Bedouins, and is in fact later codified in Mosaical law as a penalty for prostitution or for adultery for the daughter of a priest. So Judah enacts an early practice of this and has her brought out. Fortunately for Tamar, she's planned ahead. She sends a message to her father-in-law saying, these items, the staff, the signet, and the cord, belong to the man by whom I am pregnant. Come now, do you recognize these? Judah looks at his effects and goes, oh, well, this is embarrassing. Talk about being embarrassed about not being able to pay your prostitute. Imagine your own daughter-in-law comes up pregnant by you. But he says, well, the woman's more righteous than I. After all, I didn't give her to my son Shelah. So Tamar has twin boys, Perez and Zerah. Life then goes, if not happily ever after for Tamar. At least she has sons. And now you understand Judah's rod of shame. So the authors of this text, to give you a primer for the next video, have sort of dropped this story right in the middle of the whole Joseph sequence. The story of Joseph being sold by his brothers, going down to Egypt, becoming world famous, and rescuing his brothers from famine. There's a reason for that. And in the next video, we're going to talk about what Judah's rod of shame has to do with Joseph's bloody coat. That is, the coat that was torn, dipped in sheep's blood, and presented to their father as evidence for his untimely demise. Well, if that sounds interesting to you, then hang around, and next week we'll talk about that. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this video, then I'll ask you to do two things. Hit the like button if you want, subscribe, and leave a suggestion. If there are any topics or stories that you'd like to see discussed here, then by all means, leave them in the comments, and we'll see if we can't discuss them. So thanks for joining, and Lord willing, see you in the next video.